Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Another episode of the top 100 players in the NFL aired last night. So I am just here to give you the next 10 players on my list and discuss some of the players that were revealed on the players list. So hop straight on in. We're cracking through players 80 through 71, and player 80 on the players list was LeGarrette Blount, the current free agent who was playing for the Patriots last season. What to say about this one? I mean, the fact he's a free agent, I think, kind of says it all. I don't believe he's one of the top 100 players in the league. I don't even think he's one of the top 10 or 12 running backs. No help. No particular help in the receiving game. A fairly one-dimensional runner. I think he is effective when he can get head of steam going. However, if you can get him stopped in the backfield, force him to move laterally, he's not a particularly effective running back. We saw that a lot during his time in Tampa. Fortunately, in New England, they know exactly how to utilise him. Of course, a large number of touchdowns last season, but I don't think he had any right being near this list in spite of the amount of touchdowns he had last season. On my list, player number 80 is a player that was revealed in last week's players list, Doug Baldwin, the wide receiver for the Seahawks. I think he flies somewhat under the radar for most. Jimmy Graham still seems like a bigger name to the average fan, so people still sort of see him somewhat as a number one target. But I think Baldwin has been exceptional these last couple of seasons. Regularly makes very difficult catches. This year was very productive in spite of a fairly stop-start passing game, which primarily stemmed from some of the worst offensive line play in the league. But what you get with Baldwin is a great athlete, makes some very acrobatic catches over the course of the season, a very savvy route runner, very good on the double moves, he's got good quickness, and he is one of the more dangerous run after the catch receivers. I think it's pretty clear that Russell Wilson has a lot of trust in him. He doesn't take too many risks. If he does, they will likely be in Doug Baldwin's direction, and I think he really is a true number one, even if may not get to see it as often as you'd hoped last season due to, as I say, the aforementioned struggles that the Seahawks suffered in pass protection. I think if they can step that up, this is a player that can move up the list. Again, I think he's been perennially underrated over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. Superb player, a great weapon in the Seahawks arsenal. I think their receiving group would look incredibly mediocre without him. Moving on to player 79 on the players list, we've got Sean Lee, the linebacker for the Cowboys. He had a superb season on a defense that really where he was the only standout. Morris Claiborne played okay for the first portion of the year before getting injured. Wasn't quite the same when he came back. Lee was superb, much like Lavonte David for the Bucks in the previous episode. This is a guy that flies around the field. He's had a really solid career when he's been healthy, which unfortunately hasn't been much of the time. This is one of the healthier seasons he had. Just an incredibly intelligent linebacker, reads very quickly on his keys, gets there. Doesn't look like he'd be the most ferocious tackler, but he is a very sure tackler, and he's one of the better linebackers in the league in pass protection. Can run with most tight ends, understands the scheme that they run, which fortunately is one of the simpler ones, I think. But he's an incredibly intelligent player. I think that shows in every facet of the game. Racks up great numbers. Really does feel like the cleanup guy on what's, as I say, a fairly middling group in terms of overall talent level. He will be on this list, and I'll talk about him in a bit more detail. However, he is a bit higher up from myself. Player pick 79, got another Dallas Cowboy, Tyron Smith, the offensive tackle. I don't think it was his best season in pass protection. Whether there was some kind of nagging injury, something along those lines, I'm not sure. But he was beaten more regularly than I have seen. However, he gets a lot of support from his fellow line mates. It's a very good group there, of course, in Dallas. I still think he is one of the premier left tackles in the league in terms of his foot quickness, his ability to kick step out. Possibly unrivaled, definitely one of the top 3 or 4 guys. So he's very difficult to beat off the edge with just a pure speed rush. I think you can get underneath him and you can overpower him at times, but he is a really good athlete and his technique is generally pretty good. So that can be difficult to do. Had a good season run blocking, as did most of that line. He's incredibly athletic. There are certain runs you can have him lead on that other linemen could only dream of doing. So for that reason, Tyron Smith deserves to make this list. I think he had, again, another very good season there in Dallas. Moving on to player 78 on the players list, we've got Brian Orakpo of the Tennessee Titans. He's flown somewhat under the radar during his time in Tennessee. Last year, I think him and Derek Morgan were a really good tandem. And again, it's just one of those teams that most fans aren't too familiar with. He didn't quite crack my list. It's good to see him getting some recognition, especially because the standard of his play. He was, of course, well known when he was with the Redskins, a more popular team, more national recognition. He's played well in his time in Tennessee. As I say, him and Morgan have been a very good tandem. Really, between those two and Casey, they do have a very good core pass rush there in Tennessee. I say maybe didn't quite do enough to crack my list, but this is one of the ones I maybe disagree with, but I'll give the player some credit for putting this guy on the list. He was certainly close, but not quite there for me. On my list, I have Kawann Short at 78 of the Carolina Panthers. I think he could have been much higher on the list. He started the season pretty slowly, much like a large amount of that Panthers defense did. Once he got going, it was much like the previous season. As disruptive as any 4-3 D lineman on a play-by-play basis, outside of maybe Aaron Donald, once he gets it going. True free technique, far better against the run than I think was expected of him coming out of college, but plays with great strength. He's got that sort of small stoutness to him, which you see in quite a lot of these interior pass rushers, able to get underneath guards, and he can split a centre and a guard at that free technique position with his first step quickness. So this is a player I would expect to see higher up on the list next year. He's finally been paid by Carolina, so doesn't have that situation looming over his head. I think last year's first round pick in Vernon Butler, we'll start to see more of the field in pass rush situations. That might open things up more for him. And the numbers may not have, they were still very good, but I don't think the outside rush compared to the prior season when this team got to the Super Bowl, the outside rush wasn't there to support as much, and for that reason, they struggled. Of course, the coverage wasn't quite as good with Josh Norman going. All in all, it was a bit of a down year for the Panthers defence compared to what we had seen the year prior. Again, that extended to Short. First half of the season, I think he was a fairly middling, above average player, but wasn't a standout. But once he got it going, was very good. Could easily have finished higher on the list had he been a bit more consistent at the beginning of the year. Moving on with the players list, player 77, HaHa Clinton-Dix, one of my favourite safeties in the league. I really enjoy his game. Has improved massively in, I think, last season. That was he'd been solid for them before, but I think last year was his coming out party in the NFL as a top flight free safety. Really improved his anticipation. I think you can see him being more comfortable with the NFL game now, playing that deep safety role, particularly in secondary that was pretty inexperienced at the corner position for large chunks of the season. He's a willing tackler, And one of the players that, again, was close to making my list, was certainly considered towards the end. I don't believe he made it. He may have made it in, but I'm pretty sure he didn't. So that one, possibly a bit of an oversight on my part. I don't know. I do have quite a lot of safeties on the list. That said, he did have a better season than Earl Thomas or Tyrann Mathieu. So do bear that in mind. If he'd been doing it longer, he would have made the list over those guys in that 90 to 100 range. Could easily make this list next year. Glad to see him on the players list. I thought he was exceptional. My player with 77 is Melvin Ingram. So this is a fairly similar situation, I think, to discussing Brandon Graham, who was on the players list in the 100 to 90 range, or 91 range, I believe, where this guy is exceptional as an edge player. He just doesn't necessarily get the sack numbers that reflect his overall quality of play. Coming out of college, I thought he was going to be a sack artist, maybe a bit of a liability against the run. He's not the biggest dude as an edge player. If anything, it has been the total opposite. He's ferocious against the run. He's still very good against, as a rusher. It just doesn't necessarily get the final hit on the quarterback. Of course, having Bosa there certainly cleaned up some of those. Those two between them got a heck of a lot of rush on quarterbacks last season. Of course, Bosa was fantastic. Ingram, as I say, the greatest testament is how well he plays the edge. You wouldn't necessarily think looking at him, but he's incredibly stout at setting the edge, not letting guys, seal him off. Sometimes you see him double teamed and still do a really decent job of holding up against tight ends and a tackle, which again it doesn't look like he should be capable of doing. Maybe doesn't have the array of sort of finesse moves to get that final shedding of a block to get his hands on a QB. But again, this is a guy that causes a lot of pressures. Forcing movement within a pocket is sometimes as good as getting there. For the amount of incompletions this guy forces or bad throws, it may make up, and almost certainly does make up, for the lack of actual sacks produced on the field. He got paid as though he was getting those sacks by the Chargers this off-season, so that was good to see. Was he franchised? I believe he was franchised. Either way, he'll make some money next year. I think teams are well aware of how good this guy is, and very happy to have him on the list. He's been under the radar, I think, for the last couple of seasons, so good to see him. Always good to give players like this recognition. Moving on to players list, player number 76 was the always fun Justin Houston of the Chiefs. He made my list a little bit earlier, primary reason being, and for the drop here, the large chunk of the season that he missed due to being on the PUP list was very good and effective when he came back. Discussed him. I recommend checking out that video. It was the 100 to 91. If you want me to see more of my opinion on Houston, I simply had him lower down because I wanted to get sort of some of the players who had good seasons that were cut short out of the way. In most of them in the first 20. There are still some that make the list above this point. Not shocked to see him make the list. He is one of the bigger names in the NFL. I do feel this is probably a bit high. To say a guy who played in 5 or 6 games had a better season than Doug Baldwin. It sounds a bit odd to me. So that is that. My player 76 is Ryan Shazier, the linebacker for the Steelers. Loved him coming out of college. Again, great range, and I you may notice a bit of a theme. I do like my rangy, speedy linebackers. I thought this year managed to avoid some of the nagging injuries he's had over the course of his time in the Steelers, and really stepped up as sort of the primary inside backer there, where Lawrence Timmons had sort of resided the last few years. Very effective in pass coverage, which was essential for them because Lawrence Timmons has fell off in that regard, where he was once quite effective. And again, this is a guy of incredible range. I'm not sure he necessarily reads as well as some of the guys that I've previously mentioned, but his pure acceleration and burst and just straight line speed will make up for that at times. He's a pretty solid tackler. We'll miss a couple every now and then, but I feel like this is a player that's in the ascendancy. I think he improved as the season went on, as did much of that Steelers unit. I think chemistry is an important part, especially for a middle linebacker, and I think they started to get that. Started to really see him making more impact plays in the latter half of the season, and I think this is a player that could easily be top 3 at his position if he continues to improve and can avoid those injuries that have been there. He's one of the few that's got the ability to go straight man with tight ends like maybe a Jordan Reed or even a Gronk, which is such an important attribute in a 3-4 defence. I think to potentially have a safety ideally as well that could do the same, so you can disguise things. Disguise being pretty important there. So hopefully we'll see him continue to progress. I think, as I say, a couple of players that were sort of getting to this point, I think this was a real coming out season for him, and I expect to see him continue to improve. Player 75 on the players list, a player I've already mentioned on mine, Delanie Walker, another Tennessee Titan. That's probably more recognition on this list than the team's gotten over the last few years. Much like I said there, he's an exceptional tight end, one of the true double threats at the position where he can block effectively and is also a very good intermediate and short receiver. He's quite good after the catch, maybe not the most effective, very deep down the field, doesn't quite have the speed of some of the more athletic tight ends in the league, but a really good player. If you want to see a bit more on him, go check that episode out. Good to see him on the list. For me, player 75 was AJ Bouye. So this is another one of those where I think we'll start to see a bit more in the list. So as I say, the first couple episodes were a lot of players who had seasons cut short by injury. There's a fair few of those still to come. This is rather like with Kawann Short, a player who maybe wasn't so great at the start of the season and then got hot. So now we'll get to see what he can do in Jacksonville with what also looks like a pretty good defence around him. Once he did start playing well, he was possibly a top 3 or 4 player at the position, especially during the latter half of the season. Can surprisingly physical, particularly off the line of scrimmage. Has great recovery speed. Can do man to man, and it's hard to find good man corners around the NFL today. Seems like he can do that. I think that's a large reason why he got paid as much as he did. Had a pretty good defence around him, but he really was, the outstanding player, I think, defensively for them in the latter half of the season. Probably between him and Clowney, who kind of jumped off the screen. I think that's partly because we want to see a first rounder, but I think this is a player who we'll have a lot more information on this season, going over to a new scheme. Whether he's got to be the number 1 based on what he was paid, but it'll be interesting. I think him and Jalen Ramsey have the potential to be an absolutely stellar pair. It'd be an interesting kind of second season, I guess, for both of them as being known quantities, or people being aware of them both as corners, although Ramsey, of course, was a hot commodity entering the league. So I want to see that replicated. He could, based on that last half of the season, I say he was a true number 1 lockdown man corner, and this league doesn't have many. He could easily fly up this list, or he could potentially fall off it. I'm very intrigued to see how he does coming off that big money contract with the Jags. Moving on to player number 74 on the players list. At 74, we've got Harrison Smith. This is a similar player, I think, to Earl Thomas, in that the Vikings' defence was absolutely lights out at the start of the season, and then Harrison Smith went down, and there was, I think it was a 2 or 3 game spell where he was missing, and they fell apart at the seams. It really demonstrates to me the importance, when a team's got a top flight safety, how much they do rely on that player at the back end. And He didn't quite crack my list. Possibly should have. Again, whether you want him or Tyrann Mathieu, I kind of put him on over at personal preference, similar with Earl Thomas. But Smith, to be honest, should have made it on mine. Good to see the players getting recognition. He was exceptional for the vast majority of this season. He's a fantastic hitter. Probably not quite as athletic as some of those other guys, but he's not quite got like the Earl Thomas speed. Maybe not the quickness of Tyrann Mathieu. It's maybe somewhere more in the middle there, but I think he plays the run better than those two do. He's got a bit more size to him, so he's a bit more of a physical tackler. Really sets the tone at the back end. It's quite a young secondary. They've got that other than Terence Newman, who I guess his age makes up for everyone else's. And yeah, the greatest testament to how effective Harrison Smith was how that defence fell off when he wasn't there. So an exceptional player, one of my favourites. I'm a big fan of good safety play, as you'll probably notice. So good to see him on the list, even if just kind of, I don't believe he made mine. I will check. You'll have to tune in to find out. He may have made it. If he did, it was higher up. So my player number 74 was Luke Kuechly, who would have been much higher up. Once again, he was pretty exceptional this season, as we've come to expect from between him and Bobby Wagner, I suppose, considered the two at that position in the league at the moment, and that is perfectly fair. Of course, missed the last chunk of the season due to the concussion issues. That's the reason he's this low on the list. But what is there to say about him? He's an absolute tackling machine, great range. It's basically just, I think, if you're looking at your prototypical modern linebacker, this is what you're looking at. A guy with that kind of sideline range. I think there are guys that fasten him, but his ability to read and react at an exceptional speed, rack up tackles, TFLs like nobody's business, shooting gaps, making intelligent plays, sometimes going off script of what a play is designed, but that's because he understands what's going on the opposite side, so you can give him that bit of free rein. And also maybe the best coverage linebacker in football, sitting, whether it's in cover 2, whether he's lining up against tight end in man, he is absolutely fantastic, reading what the offense is trying to do, undercutting, timing up, physical big hits, either stopping a receiver or tight end stone cold, or forcing the ball out. There really is, outside of the concussion history, there is no weakness to his game. So certainly, again, health notwithstanding, this is a guy that will fly up my list next year. Moving on to player number 73, one of my favourites, Philip Rivers. He is fun to watch. Phil, this year should be a far more positive one for him. I think he makes my list. He's a bit higher up. He's much like kind of like with Jameis and why he made the list. This is a guy that's making a lot of plays in spite of what's around him. Of course, this team has been debilitated by injuries over the last couple of years. Once Melvin Gordon went down, didn't have a huge amount to work with. The offensive line was poor. Again, that's something they've looked to upgrade in the draft. Keenan Allen once again played in one game and was dominant for that one game. Again, it's 2 years in a row he's had a fantastic week 1, other than the season-ending injury that occurred. Yeah, I'll talk more about Rivers later on in my list. Perfectly reasonable to have him there. I think could have been a bit higher up, but I guess with the lack of team success, I will not be too critical of the players on this one. My player number 73 had what I think was an exceptional sort of comeback type season, Jason Pierre-Paul. So first full season back since the fireworks incident, and I think this was possibly his finest season in the NFL. Again, sack numbers may not be there, but he has developed his ability to play the run, which back when he was putting up 15 odd sacks or so a season earlier in his career, he was selling out selling out to stop the pass, was a bit of a liability on the edge. He has become an exceptional edge defender, plays a far more physical and rugged style than he initially. It used to just be pure speed rusher off the edge. And now we're seeing a more rounded game. Again, the numbers aren't necessarily there, but we're seeing him stunting inside. Seeing him just stack offensive linemen up to seal the edge. I think the tackling, you can see it sometimes. That it's a hindrance. Of course it is. But frankly, the level of play that he put out in every facet, and frankly that whole defensive line for New York was pretty exceptional for a large chunk of the season. He deserves a ton of credit for changing his game up. Not necessarily, I don't know if it's necessary to deal with the injury, but he's flat out improved as a player. Last year's version of Joseph Pierre-Paul is the best that the league has seen. It'll be interesting to see if he can maybe add a bit more of that dynamic speed rush to his game without compromising his ability to play the run. Having missed so much time, hopefully we'll see that come back. He's developed into a real asset. They couldn't let him leave New York. So good on him for managing to make it back. Player number 72 on the players list, Taylor Lewan, another Titan, very Titan heavy episode. Deserves to make it. He's one of the best young left tackles in football. I think this is the epitome of, when they say lunch pail type guys. Again, don't think he's the best athlete. He's not quite like Joe Thomas in pass protection, where it's this smooth, elegant thing. But man, this guy competes every single play. He's a real leader. I believe he is the leader of that offense. Mariota certainly seems like a quieter guy. So Lewan leads that group. It's a young group on offense there. Fantastic run blocker. I think it's the best asset of his game. He's good in pass pro. He's very good. But his run blocking is physical, it's effective, and he was a huge part of that line being successful. I will talk a bit more about Lewan though once I get to him. He does feature on my list at a higher point than this. My player number 72, sticking with the O-line, Kevin Zeitler, formerly of the Bengals, now playing for the Cleveland Browns. This is a very good guard. He's been, again, under the radar. I think the Bengals done such a good job of developing players on that offensive line over the last decade or so that some of those guys just don't ever really necessarily become known. And this guy is one of the top young guards in football. He doesn't really have any holes in his game. Maybe not the most dominant run blocker, but I think he's one of the better pass protection guys in the league. I think he thoroughly I expected him to get the kind of contract that he did, especially with, I think, the success that the Titans had last year, the Cowboys had. I think teams are going to start valuing interior linemen a bit more than they perhaps have in the past, and players like this are the reason why. Again, it's a sort of competitive player, kind of like Lewan, maybe not the greatest athlete at the position. He's not quite Zach Martin level of athlete, but he's very effective. He's a great technician and very consistent. You do not see too many mistakes in his technique in particular. As I say, pass pro probably a bit stronger than his run blocking. Exceptional player. Makes my list. Wonder whether he'll crack the players one. Moving on to player number 71 on the players list. Who have we got there? My apologies. And again, apologies as well while I find it for the noise in the background. Of course, can't account for these kind of things. Unfortunately, I'm busy. I will not have an opportunity to re-record this. Julian Edelman. It's a tough one, I think. I'm just going to say now, Edelman does not make my list, which may be a bit controversial. I think Edelman is a very good player, but I just simply don't think he's a better wide receiver than the guys I've got on this list. Of course, perfect fit for that offense. We saw, what Wes Welker was used in very much a similar way when he was there. I didn't think Welker was one of the top wideouts in the league. He's got a job within that system and he does it at an incredibly high level. I don't necessarily see enough high difficulty level plays. It's a lot of drags, a lot of slants, and a lot of option routes. And he does deserve a lot of credit for understanding the game enough to be used on those option routes so consistently and be so effective on them, being on the same page as Brady, etc., etc. but alas, he does not make my list. I perhaps don't put enough value in sort of slot-specific type players, but unfortunately, no, he did not qualify. I think part of the reason he may make the players list, I've got no doubt they've got a lot more wide receivers on their list than me. I think I've only got about 8 or 9, so I don't think he cracks that kind of bracket. I'll do a breakdown once the series is done of my positional breakdown. At pick player 71 for me though, also a wide receiver, and this is a guy that could have been in the top 10 of the list had his season not been cut short by injury. He was having, I think, the most productive season of his career, which has been defined by production, and that is AJ Green of the Bengals. Unfortunately, he didn't crack 1,000 yards this year. Was incredibly close before getting hurt. That was I'd say about AJ Green. I was in love with AJ Green when he was coming out of college, because his tape is just basically him running around totally uncovered at large amounts of the time. I think he's better than people think. Maybe up until last season, the offensive talent, I think, in Cincy had been pretty good around him, so maybe he didn't get as high a volume of passes as some of the other number one receivers in the league. You had Sanu and Marvin Jones there, Tyler Eifert, Bernard and Jeremy Hill in the backfield. So there was a real sort of discrepancy, I think, between him and guys like Odell Beckham in terms of the amount of catches being made. On top of that, it would be a fairly run-heavy team. Andy Dalton as well, not the best deep thrower in the world. The amount of times AJ Green gets open deep and has to go track the ball back because he's been underthrown is frankly shocking. I don't know if I've ever seen a player have to do it as often as he does. Last year was making high difficulty catches, tore apart Miami in the first half of that game. I think that was a Thursday nighter. Absolutely humiliated Darrelle Revis in week 1. He was having his way with teams. The Browns, the game where he made the Hail Mary, he was going nuts in that game before that play. Was well on his way to having the best statistical season of his career, as I say, because some of those weapons aren't there or weren't there. More was forced on his shoulders, and he absolutely stepped up and lived up to that. I think he's the best route runner in the league. It's between him and Antonio Brown, I would argue. I think Brown's a better athlete. He's a little bit shorter, so he's a little bit more fluid. But in terms of pure technique, I think AJ Green is the best. His double moves are disgraceful. There's a reason you'll see him so open so often. Not that often that you see it, but yeah, and he's a bigger guy. He makes the tough contested catches, has great hands, is decent after the catch, has high-end speed. I mean, he's got it all. A fantastic player. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's the most underrated receiver in football. And it was an easy call for him to be on the list. And even though he missed a large chunk, to have him at a reasonably high spot. So there we go. That's my list. The players list this week, not a bad one, to be honest. A lot of players that we've got featured on mine. I don't think there's anyone egregiously high up here. A couple that I think are a bit lower than they perhaps should be, but they're players I didn't necessarily expect to make it. The guys I don't have on my list are guys that were certainly in consideration. So, this week, pretty happy with the players. So, there you have it. Apologies for one more voice, a bit nasally, because I do have, I'm in day 1 of a cold, which is always the worst. Apologies for the background sound as well. I know that is a nuisance. Unfortunately, I will not have an opportunity to re-record this today, so that's this point. But thank you very much for toughing it out if you have. If you want to comment below, do so. We've got the Facebook Cover Zero. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conway. More than happy to chat ball, chat your opinions on my list as well as the players list. Love that kind of stuff. And as always, check out more. Got some more unique content coming up the rest of this week. Cover Who tomorrow. Tune in to find out which unsung player I'll be discussing. Thursday we'll be going through the Niners QB issues and what they're going to look to do this season and next. what options might be available to them. So I think that should be good. And as always, if you could like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for checking this show out. Been a pleasure as always. Have a great day and go Bucks.